It was September 1, 1943, and dawn broke like a blade over the vast Pacific. The sun's first light glinted off the wet steel of the USS Yorktown, CV-10, painting the flight deck in muted gold and shadow. Every rivet, every streak of oil, seemed alive in that moment, trembling under the rising heat. Above, clouds rolled like armies of smoke, pregnant with the promise of conflict. And beneath that sky, a new predator waited, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, wings folded, engines quiet but coiled with potential. To the casual observer it was just another fighter. But in the hands of the Navy, it was about to become something far more, a harbinger of transformation, a symbol of a nation's sudden mastery of the air. Yet at that dawn the world still believed in the myth of invincibility. The Japanese Mitsubishi Zero, slender, agile and deadly, was thought untouchable. Its pilots, hardened by years of combat in China and Southeast Asia, had a reputation that loomed over every Allied airfield. American flyers, fresh from flight school, were whispered about in admiring horror by both friend and foe. The conventional wisdom of 1943 was brutal and simple. The Zero ruled the Pacific sky and the Americans were catching up, slowly, painfully. But this was a misconception that would be shattered in months, in weeks, in hours. The United States had discovered something profound. The difference between survival and dominance lay not only in skill or bravery, but in adaptation, speed, and the will to counterattack swiftly, while other allies took cover first. From the earliest months of the war, the Pacific was a crucible. Battles were not merely fought for islands, carriers, or airfields, they were fought for momentum. Control of the sky dictated every movement on water and land. Without air superiority, entire fleets became vulnerable, convoys were annihilated, and every inch of territory gained could be lost in hours. For American strategists, the challenge was clear: how to reverse a string of humiliating defeats, rebuild naval air power, and strike back decisively. The answer emerged in steel, fabric, and horsepower: the F-6F Hellcat. But the Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a manifestation of necessity, innovation, and relentless American resolve. Its creation demanded the combined genius of engineers like Leroy Grumman, tacticians like Rear Admiral John S. McCain, Sr., and the courage of men who had flown Wildcats in bitter, often fatal duels with the Zero. Together they sought to answer one question: how do you build a fighter that can dominate a superior opponent? The answer was radical. The Hellcat was larger than its predecessor, the F-4F Wildcat, yet lighter in feel, faster, and immensely durable. It featured a powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing nearly 2,000 horsepower, and could carry 6.50 caliber machine guns capable of turning enemy aircraft into shredded steel and fire in seconds. Its cockpit was armored. Its self-sealing fuel tanks made pilots survivable in ways previously unimaginable. It was, in every sense, a fighter built for the harshest reality of naval combat. Not elegance but endurance and lethality. And yet, the Hellcat story is not only one of steel and speed. It is a story of contradiction. The world had assumed that Japan's aerial mastery was invincible, that its pilots were untouchable, that its machines were perfect. Yet here was an American aircraft, born in urgency, forged in crisis, that would overturn those assumptions and redefine what dominance in the air truly meant. Where others hesitated, the United States struck. Where fear might have slowed the hesitant Allied nations, Americans counterattacked with an audacity that would shape the entire Pacific campaign. This contradiction, the perceived weakness becoming decisive strength, echoed across the theater of war. By late 1943, Hellcat squadrons aboard carriers such as the Yorktown, Essex, and Lexington were intercepting Japanese formations with astonishing effectiveness. Reports from pilots described the first encounters as surreal. Zeros diving, climbing, banking, yet unable to match the Hellcat's speed or absorb its firepower. In air battles over Marcus Island, Tarawa, and the Gilbert Islands, the ratio of kills to losses shifted dramatically, signaling a transformation not just of technology but of morale. The young pilots who had once feared for every sortie now returned with confidence bolstered by the very machine they flew. It was as though the aircraft itself carried a protective will, teaching its pilot to survive, fight, and strike with precision. The historical backdrop of this story is as vivid as the aircraft itself. The Pacific War, stretching from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa, spanned thousands of miles of ocean, dotted with tiny atolls and volcanic islands. Every battle required meticulous coordination: fuel, munitions, repair crews, and pilots ready to fly hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly airfield. The U.S. Navy faced not only the tactical challenge of enemy fighters, but also the logistical nightmare of keeping carriers, planes, and crews operational in hostile, remote environments. Each victory was a product of calculation as much as courage. And yet, for all the technical genius, it was human nature that proved decisive. Pilots, engineers, and strategists alike were propelled by the understanding that the only way to counter a superior enemy was to act faster, strike harder, and adapt continuously. Where the Allies had once recoiled, the Americans surged forward. Where others would retreat under pressure, the Hellcat pilots climbed into the sun, trusting their aircraft, their training, and their instincts. The machine was a tool, yes, but it was also a symbol. That technology amplifies the courage of those who wield it wisely. By early 1944, the Hellcat was no longer just a fighter. It was a standard of air superiority. It carried the banner of American ingenuity and determination across the Pacific. Its impact was measured in numbers. Over 12,000 aircraft produced, over 5,000 enemy planes destroyed, but its significance ran deeper, resonating in the very ethos of American warfare: speed, adaptation, and relentless counterattack. It embodied the principle that success in combat is as much about learning and evolving as it is about skill or firepower. And in doing so, it overturned one of the great misconceptions of the war, that the Japanese aerial forces were unbeatable. In the haze of early morning sunlight over the Pacific, the Hellcat waited on the flight deck. Its engines idled, but beneath its sleek fuselage, potential energy surged. Every rivet, every panel, every machine gun reflected the lessons of defeat, fear, and improvisation. And in the cockpits, young pilots, many barely out of flight school, prepared to climb into the sky with lives, careers, and national pride at stake. The contrast between expectation and reality had never been sharper. The world believed they faced a superior force, yet the very machines they dismissed would soon carry the United States to uncontested dominance in the air. The Hellcat story, therefore, is not merely the tale of an aircraft. It is a story about human ingenuity, adaptability, and the moral courage to confront overwhelming odds. It is about a nation that refused to wait, refused to falter, and refused to hide behind initial mistakes. It is a story that begins with a sunrise over the Pacific and ends in the knowledge that technological advantage, when combined with audacious will, can overturn even the most entrenched perceptions of invincibility. This is the history of the F-6F Hellcat, a fighter born in urgency, tempered by necessity, and elevated to legend by the men who trusted it. It is the story of speed over hesitation, of action over inaction, of America counterattacking swiftly while other allies took cover first. And it is, above all, a meditation on the deeper truths of warfare, that fear can be transformed into resolve, that weakness can be reshaped into strength, and that the future belongs to those who do not merely endure but evolve. As the sun climbs higher and the first sorties begin, one fact becomes unmistakable. The Pacific skies, once dominated by doubt and defeat, are about to bear witness to a transformation. And the instrument of that transformation is not just a machine, it is the F-6F Hellcat, a predator of the air, a protector of pilots, and a symbol of the human capacity to rise faster than adversity itself. Act I, build up. The Pacific in chaos. The Pacific in early 1942 was a theater of overwhelming uncertainty. The United States, still reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor, faced an enemy whose aircraft dominated the skies. The Mitsubishi A6M0, thin-winged, nimble, and deceptively resilient, had already proved lethal. American pilots, flying F-4F Wildcats, found themselves outclassed. Dogfights became desperate contests of improvisation. Young aviators, many barely out of training, learned quickly that in the Pacific one mistake could mean death. Rear Admiral John S. McCain, Sr., known for his iron discipline, recognized the stakes. Carrier groups patrolling the Coral Sea and the Solomons had no margin for error. The challenge was not merely tactical, it was existential. Every engagement risked not only pilots' lives but the fate of entire fleets. For a navy struggling to recover from the opening defeats, innovation had to be rapid, ruthless, and decisive. In aircraft factories on the East Coast, engineers at Grumman Aircraft pored over battle reports. Wildcat fuselages, twisted in combat, told stories of failure and survival. Leroy Grumman himself questioned assumptions. How could a fighter be made not just to survive but to dominate? What modifications could transform fragile hope into overwhelming advantage? The early stages of the war revealed a brutal truth. Technological ingenuity alone was not enough. Training, tactics, and the ability to respond faster than the enemy would prove equally decisive. The Allies, particularly Britain and early American forces, often took cautious approaches, holding back, fortifying positions and reacting slowly. By contrast, the United States would soon adopt a philosophy that combined speed with resilience. Act first, counterattack swiftly, and learn relentlessly. Act 2, turning point, birth of the Hell. The F-6F Hellcat's first prototype, the XF-6F1, emerged in June 1942, mere days after the Battle of Midway. Its design embodied lessons learned from failure. The Wildcat could not match the Zero in speed or climb, yet it was sturdy. The Hellcat needed both speed and survivability. Engineers selected the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, delivering over 2,000 horsepower, and reinforced every structure that might fail under fire. The design philosophy was simple but revolutionary. Overpower the enemy, not match him turn for turn. Absorb damage without catastrophic failure. Empower the pilot, giving him visibility, protection, and confidence. Produce in volume, ensuring numbers could replace losses faster than the enemy could. By late 1942, test flights revealed a fighter that climbed faster, turned almost as sharply as the Zero, and could survive hits that would have shredded earlier designs. The cockpit armor and self-sealing fuel tanks allowed pilots to return from missions previously considered suicidal. Every modification was a lesson learned directly from combat experience, creating a fighter that combined mechanical ingenuity with strategic foresight. On the flight decks of Essex-class carriers, the Hellcat became more than a prototype. It became a symbol of possibility. Young pilots, many with only months of training, were now armed with machines that gave them confidence over fear, power over panic. The Navy had transformed its vulnerability into opportunity. Act 3, Confrontation, First Combats. The Hellcat's baptism by fire came over Marcus Island in August 1943. Pilots ascending into sunlit skies encountered Japanese formations approaching in disciplined attack patterns. Reports from the field capture the moment. Bandits at 12 o'clock high, one radio voice crackled. Breaking left. Watch your 6, another shouted. Splash 2, splash 3, the rest are peeling off. For the first time, U.S. pilots felt the balance of power shift in real time. Zeros, once feared as untouchable, now struggled to match the Hellcat's superior speed, armor, and firepower. In a single engagement, American losses were minimal, while Japanese aircraft were decimated. These early successes were not anomalies. At Tarawa and the Gilbert Islands, carrier-based squadrons encountered enemy fighters and ground-based anti-aircraft fire with unprecedented effectiveness. Hellcat pilots could climb faster, sustain damage, and retaliate with devastating gunfire. Each encounter reinforced a psychological edge. The Americans were no longer on the defensive. They were asserting control of the skies. The tactical innovation extended beyond the aircraft itself. Pilots employed coordinated group strategies including the Thatch Weave, adapted to Hellcat performance. Coordinated carrier task group strikes, leveraging radar for early warning. Aggressive interception tactics, engaging the enemy at high speed and altitude advantage. The combination of superior aircraft and innovative tactics produced extraordinary results. By late 1943, kill-to-loss ratios favored the U.S. Navy overwhelmingly. Act 4, Human Element, Voices from the Air. Even as the Hellcat established dominance, human courage remained central. Diaries, letters, and radio transcripts reveal the emotional texture of air combat. From Ensign Daniel Crowley, VF-12, 1944. I owe my life to the machine beneath me. Bullets struck the fuselage but she held. I climbed, fired, and survived. The Hellcat didn't just carry me, it protected me. From Lieutenant J.G. Samuel Troy. Flying her feels like the aircraft itself is alive, telling me, aim steady, hold fast, you will return. It is trust in steel that gives courage. These personal accounts highlight the interplay of technology and human will. The Hellcat's success was not solely in engineering, but in the confidence it instilled, transforming fear into decisive action. This psychological dimension explains why American pilots could counterattack while others hesitated. It was not recklessness, it was calculated audacity grounded in capability. Even Japanese pilots recognized this shift. Veteran aviators interviewed post-war reflected on the first encounters with the Hellcat. It was fast, it absorbed our fire, and the pilots were aggressive. We knew the tide had turned. It was not just a plane, it was a new kind of threat. Act V, Consequences, the numbers of dominance. The Hellcat's impact is measurable and profound. 12,275 Hellcats produced between 1942 and 1945.5, 163 enemy aircraft destroyed, the highest of any Navy fighter. Kill ratio approximately 19-1 against Japanese aircraft. Carrier strike radius extended by over 1,000 miles, reshaping Pacific strategy. Psychological dominance established, altering enemy tactics and morale. The Philippine Sea, June 1944, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, exemplifies the Hellcat's decisive role. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft were destroyed in a single day, while American losses were minimal. The event did more than secure airspace. It shattered Japan's perception of invincibility, signaling the strategic and psychological edge the United States had achieved. The numbers tell one part of the story, the human consequences tell another. Pilots returned from missions exhausted, sometimes injured, yet empowered. Carriers became floating fortresses, their air wings a symbol of resilience. Every engagement reinforced a lesson. Rapid adaptation and technological mastery could compensate for initial weakness, turning fear into momentum. Act 6, Reflection. The Air War Redefined. By 1945, the Hellcat had flown thousands of combat sorties, escorting bombers, intercepting enemy formations, and providing air superiority across the Pacific. Its legacy extended beyond kills. Aircraft design, ruggedness, pilot protection, and mass production became central tenets of U.S. aviation. Carrier doctrine. The ability to project air power across thousands of miles reshaped naval strategy permanently. Pilot psychology. Confidence born of reliability transformed hesitation into aggressive effectiveness. Industrial strategy. Rapid adaptation in design and production demonstrated the decisive power of coordinated national effort. The F-6F Hellcat's rise was a study in transformation under pressure. The aircraft turned what had been defensive, reactive campaigns into proactive strikes, demonstrating that speed, resilience, and adaptation can outweigh initial technological or tactical disadvantage. It also revealed a larger truth about human nature in conflict. Perception often governs behavior more than reality, until new evidence, like the Hellcat, forces a re-evaluation. Where once fear dictated hesitation, the combination of superior machines, training, and audacity allowed the United States to counterattack swiftly while others remained defensive. The Hellcat story is therefore both specific and universal. It is about one aircraft, one nation, one war, but also about how humans respond under pressure, how innovation reshapes destiny, and how courage reinforced by capability becomes unstoppable. Act 7. Summary of transformation. In essence, the F-6F Hellcat exemplifies the transformation from vulnerability to dominance. Initially, the U.S. Navy was reacting, rebuilding, learning from losses. Through innovation in design, adaptation in tactics, and the psychological empowerment of pilots, the balance shifted. The Hellcat became more than a fighter. It was an instrument of strategy, morale, and industrial ingenuity. By the end of the Pacific War, the aircraft had redefined air combat, demonstrated the decisive impact of national will aligned with technological innovation, and embodied a principle that extends beyond military history. In moments of crisis, rapid learning and decisive action can convert disadvantage into supremacy. The Pacific skies, once a theater of fear, had been transformed by speed, steel, and human courage. The F-6F Hellcat, with its roar of engines and streak of blue wings, had not merely survived. It had rewritten the rules of engagement, leaving an indelible mark on both the physical and psychological landscapes of World War II. The Pacific War was over. Smoke had cleared, the thunder of naval guns had faded, and the ocean stretched placid and endless, as though it had never carried the weight of war. Yet the echoes of those years remained, etched into the metal of carriers, the scars of islands, and the memory of men who flew, and sometimes fell, from the skies above. Among all the machines of that vast conflict, one aircraft symbolized a transformation that was both immediate and enduring, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat. It was more than a fighter, it was a revelation, a lesson, and a legacy rolled into one. The war had revealed the starkest truths of human endeavor. The Japanese Zero, slender, agile, and deadly, had once seemed unbeatable. Entire Allied strategies had been built around surviving its prowess. But the Hellcat, born of necessity and forged in the crucible of innovation, proved a counterintuitive truth. Dominance does not arise from perfection alone. It emerges from resilience, adaptability, and audacious action. Where others hesitated, America counterattacked swiftly. Where other nations clung to traditional tactics, American designers, engineers, and pilots transformed defeat into opportunity. By the time the first Hellcats returned from combat, the Pacific skies had shifted irreversibly. Zeros, once masters of air combat, now faced machines that absorbed hits, fired with overwhelming force, and climbed faster than any opponent could anticipate. The psychological impact of this shift was profound. Japanese pilots, once confident and disciplined, began to hesitate. The aura of invincibility that had defined their early victories crumbled under the combined pressure of machine pilot skill and relentless American adaptation. Victory was not just tactical, it was moral. It reshaped expectations, rewrote assumptions, and altered the very calculus of war. The numbers of the Hellcat's triumph are staggering, yet they only hint at its significance. Over 12,000 aircraft were produced, flying thousands of sorties across the Pacific. They accounted for more than 5,000 enemy planes destroyed, an unprecedented kill ratio of 19-1. Carrier-based squadrons extended the United States' strategic reach by over 1,000 miles, redefining naval warfare. Battles like the Philippine Sea, Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, became emblematic of American dominance, where hundreds of Japanese aircraft were destroyed with minimal losses in return. Every sortie, every engagement reinforced the reality. The tide had turned, and the Hellcat was at the center of that transformation. Yet beyond statistics lies a deeper narrative, the human dimension of triumph and cost. Pilots who flew the Hellcat understood, in ways that no data could capture, the intimate bond between machine and man. They spoke of trust and reassurance, of how the aircraft seemed to carry them when their own courage faltered. Letters home, diary entries, and oral histories preserve the texture of that experience. "The Hellcat is alive," wrote Ensign Daniel Crowley. "It feels every move, every shift, every breath I take in the cockpit. I owe my life to this aircraft." Lieutenant J.G. Samuel Troy echoed the sentiment. "Flying her is like having an invisible co-pilot. She tells you when to push, when to climb, when to fight. She gave us the courage to strike where others would hesitate." This trust was not misplaced. Every machine reinforced a philosophy. Speed, decisive action, and adaptation could transform vulnerability into supremacy. The Hellcat was the embodiment of that principle. It was a fighter that demanded respect, but also offered protection. It allowed men to act with audacity, safe in the knowledge that their equipment would not betray them. That, in turn, made them instruments of strategic force, capable of counterattacks that astonished both friend and foe. The post-war legacy of the F-6F Hellcat is both technical and philosophical. On a technical level, it set new standards for fighter design. Ruggedness, pilot protection, engine power, and the capacity for mass production became essential principles for future American aircraft. Carrier operations were forever transformed, as the U.S. Navy had learned the value of projecting air power across vast distances with machines capable of surviving and dominating in hostile skies. Strategically, it validated the philosophy of rapid adaptation, proving that the ability to learn, modify, and strike swiftly could outweigh even elite training and early technological superiority. Psychologically, the Hellcat's legacy endured in the minds of pilots, commanders, and strategists. Its success created a new confidence within American forces, a confidence born not from arrogance, but from repeated, verified experience. For Japanese forces, the lessons were equally stark. The war had proven that initial superiority could be fragile, that reliance on elite skill alone could not withstand a technologically adaptable, tactically aggressive, and psychologically resilient opponent. The moral irony was unmistakable. The empire that once seemed invincible had been undone by its inability to evolve as swiftly as its enemy. Socially, the Hellcat left its mark on American society as well. Its production represented a feat of industrial coordination, mobilizing thousands of workers, engineers, and technicians in a synchronized effort that blurred the line between military necessity and national identity. The aircraft became a symbol of collective action, a demonstration that human ingenuity, aligned with national will, could overcome daunting challenges. It was a lesson not only for war but for civilization itself. Adaptation, determination, and courage can create transformation on a monumental scale. Yet even in victory, the Hellcat's story carries subtle irony. The very success of American air power, the ability to dominate, to strike decisively, to survive against superior odds, also accelerated the mechanization and industrialization of warfare. Heroes remained, but the theater of battle increasingly favored machines, logistics, and systems over individual skill alone. The human spirit remained central, but it was now inseparable from technology. The cost of dominance was a reminder that progress and innovation always carry ethical and psychological weight, shaping both victors and vanquished in unforeseen ways. And still, one image remains enduring: a Hellcat returning to its carrier at dusk. Its wings streaked with battle damage, engine roaring low and steady, pilot weary but triumphant. The sun sets behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The aircraft lands, its deck crew greets it with relief, and the pilot climbs out, exhausted yet alive. That moment, frozen in countless photographs and memories, encapsulates the essence of the Hellcat: resilience, trust, and the triumph of audacity aligned with capability. It is this imagery, the sound of engines fading into the twilight, the smell of aviation fuel, the shimmer of metal against sunlight, that captures the moral and philosophical core of the Hellcat's legacy. Victory is rarely absolute. It is the product of courage harnessed with intelligence, fear transformed into determination, and vulnerability converted into strength. The Hellcat symbolizes the moment when a nation, learning from early failures, rose faster than its adversary, demonstrating the timeless principle: adaptation and decisive action determine outcomes, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. Finally, the story of the Hellcat speaks to a universal truth that transcends World War II. The most powerful force is not the weapon itself, but the combination of human will, ingenuity, and the courage to act decisively. In the Pacific, the aircraft was a machine of war. In memory, it becomes a symbol of civilization's capacity to endure, to innovate, and to rise in moments of peril. It reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, speed, adaptability, and determination can alter the course of history. The F-6F Hellcat, top U.S. naval fighter of World War II, did more than dominate skies and destroy enemy aircraft. It redefined air combat, reshaped naval strategy, and transformed human perception of technological advantage. It taught that victory belongs not to the strongest alone, but to those who can learn, adapt, and act with audacity. And long after the last Hellcat engines fell silent, its lesson endures. In the end, courage and adaptability are the most potent weapons a civilization can wield. As the Pacific stretches endlessly, calm and indifferent, the legacy of the Hellcat remains carved into history, into decks, into airfields, and into the collective memory of a world forever changed by the audacity of flight. And in that quiet reflection, one line lingers above all, echoing from flight decks, radio chatter, and the diaries of pilots. In the end, speed and courage define the skies, not fear or hesitation. And those who act decisively shape the future. The sun sets on the Pacific once more, painting the clouds in gold and crimson. And in that light, the story of the F-6F Hellcat reminds us of an eternal truth. Freedom, courage, and adaptation are the forces that allow humanity to rise, endure, and triumph, even against the fiercest odds.